when everyone around you is like, why don't you expand? Why don't you get more? Like that is even many Christians have said something like that to us, like, go get more, go get more. And I get the argument of the more you have, the more you can give away. That's a risky thing though, because the more you have also, the more you can be infected by greed. So I think it is countercultural, but very Jesus-like to just say, this is enough.
All right, so today we're back with the Persisting and Purpose podcast, and I have Ben Somerville here. And Ben and I actually met. He's one of the first people I got to meet when I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, or a little town called Fuquay, Varina. And when we moved out here, I have a video production company still, and I wanted to reach out to some small businesses that I could do a free video for. Not really to grow the business, but more to just meet some people and help in the process. And it just happened that Ben was an elder at the church we were planning to visit. And so that was really fun. And so today I'm excited to have this episode with Ben as we discuss just his career path. He's currently the owner of an amazing coffee shop and roastery here in town that's a big part of the community. But he's had an interesting journey along the way. And we also are in a new space that's not quite built up. As you can see, I just put a couple plants and a few books in the background. And you'll probably hear some background noise because this is in the middle of a warehouse. And so this will be a fun, interesting experiment. So if you hear some background noise, you might hear a forklift or something go by. Have some grace. But yeah, Ben, I'm excited to have you here today. And just wanted to start out by, can you give us a quick flyby of your career path? Obviously, right now, you're a coffee roaster and you're doing some also nonprofit related stuff with serving food to the community. But how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Greg. And thanks for letting me christen the space here with you in the warehouse. I grew up here in the area. I was born in Georgia, but my dad moved here in the 80s to RTP to take a job. And so I've been in Cary, Apex, Fuquay, this part of the suburbs most of my life. Growing up, I was a dreamer. I had a billion ideas, all sorts of things that I was really interested in. I've always just had a huge amount of curiosity about also just life and everything. And so when I got out of high school and started thinking and making decisions about what I wanted to do, I felt really stuck because it was just overwhelming. There were so many things I was interested in doing. One of my first real jobs was working at the Y, the local Y here in the area, as kind of like a camp director sort of job. You know, I started as just like a camp counselor, running around with a bunch of kids and having a good time. And in that job, one of the things that I kind of learned about myself was that I really enjoyed hospitality. We would do, kind of like, we have a lot of year-round schools here. We would do end of track sort of programs. And so the parents would come and I would make, a slideshow and do all this stuff. And I found that I really enjoyed like hosting people and delivering an experience that people like reacted to. So after the Y, I went to NC State communications. I was actually thinking that I was going to do like audio video production type stuff. I loved taking pictures and I loved making videos and stuff like that. And thought that would be where I landed and did some different odd jobs there. But I think overall, I really was struggling to kind of nail down something and really go after it. And so I actually ended up like mid-20s kind of floundering not sure what to do, where to go. And through, through just a kind of sequence of coming to terms with some things that I was struggling with, I kind of re-engaged with my faith. I ended up at the Summit Church
Yeah.
here in Raleigh and ended up just like taking an internship with them. I didn't have plans, I wasn't on any sort of like vocational ministry track,
Right.
but I ended up enjoying my work at Summit. I had just kind of come back to my faith. Summit is a big church, lots of campuses. It is nationally known as one of the top sending churches. So there's really a strong vision there for people being engaged in how they follow Jesus and going, all over the place, wherever he sends them. And so I felt like starting work there as an intern and eventually as kind of like a logistics job, I was just getting all this great stuff about my faith and learning a lot from JD and the staff there, and ended up there for 5 years. It was a good place to kind of park and sort of stabilize some things in my life. But kind of coming out of that, my wife and I both kind of picked up some of those hospitality interests that we had. I started roasting coffee just for fun. And about 5 years into my job at Summit, we made the transition to open Cultivate. And so that's kind of just a high overview, kind of what my career path looked like. But in vocational ministry for a while, and then we were sent out of Summit into the community to open a community space. So
Okay, awesome.
yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome. So you're a dreamer, you had lots of different ideas. You thought you were going some different paths as you sort of reignited your faith. You ended up in a church setting. And then how long has it been with Cultivate?
So this summer we'll celebrate 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. So now it was 5 years in the church and about 7 years
About
now.
7. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And so how did you decide? You mentioned that you were doing some roasting
hmm
and you had the hospitality side. How did you decide on a coffee shop? And how did you decide on a coffee shop in downtown Fuquay, Verena?
It was one of those things where it was less about us deciding and more about, and the opportunity when it came was so crystal clear that it was obvious that if we were going to pursue this was the shot, to do that. And so we had been looking, we had, enjoyed the experience of roasting, had a small customer base. Part of it was the influence of Summit and us thinking really strategically and wanting to have a space that was open, like a coffee shop is. It's just a space where anyone can come in the community and can work on themselves or, meet with someone else and work on a friendship or a relationship. And we were looking for a space for 2 years, not necessarily in Fuquay, but also other areas, and just getting nowhere. I mean, nowhere. Like we didn't even really ever look at something that was like a serious consideration for a variety of reasons. Some of it was financial. Some of it was just, coffee is it's a tough business. And so the location is just so important that we were really hoping that we wouldn't just end up in a strip mall or something like that, because that's a really tough place to make it work. And what ended up happening is, we're in a building built in the 60s. It was the original EMS station for the town that we renovated and retrofitted. And that just through a kind of bizarre kind of set of circumstances, we had looked at the building to rent it, but it was like walls and a roof. And so it was several $100,000 worth of renovation to make it possible. And it had to be rezoned and all these different things. And so in a renting situation, that didn't make any sense for us to put all of that into it. But then what happened was I guess the guy couldn't find anyone to rent it. So he decided to put it up for sale. And another guy at Summit, who was a successful kind of mid-sized business owner,
Yeah.
he basically called one day and said, hey, you know, that building that you walked through, it's for sale. And, you know, I'll buy it. And I'll also put in the money to do that big renovation project that we didn't have the money to do. And so it was just, you know, it was clear that if we were going to jump into it, that was the opportunity that God was providing to us.
Yeah.
So that gave us a great deal of confidence to move forward, even though it was difficult, because it just felt like a clear answer to that, to the prayer, God, if you want us to do this,
Yeah.
you know, we don't know how this is going to work, but if you want us to do it, we know that you'll make a way for it to work. And so he did, and it was clear, and we moved forward from there with launching it.
So let me get the timeline right then. You said it took 2 years to find the space.
Mhm.
So if I'm correct, that would mean the last 2 years of being on staff at Summit.
Mhm.
So you knew for 2 years that you were going to do the coffee shop before it happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that tension like of feeling you were called to this idea, but it taking years to get there?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I guess a few things in that. Like, did you feel senioritis, like discontent in the role that you were currently in as you were waiting for something that you were excited for?
Mhm.
Or were you able to like truly be present in the current role while hoping for this next thing?
Mhm.
Kind of describe what that season was like.
Yeah. Well, it was 2 years of looking. I think that there was a part of us, and that was just maybe, you know, our faith struggling. So I wouldn't say we were interested in doing it, but it really seemed like there were some big barriers to entry that we just didn't have a way to overcome. So we were looking, but we weren't sure. You know, I mean, we weren't sure if it was going to work out or not, and we knew that something significant would have to happen in order for it to work out. And then it actually took another year to renovate it. It took a whole year to do the renovation. So that was another year of waiting, even though like at that point we knew it was coming and happening. So we definitely had some just what was the word you used for it? Just we definitely
tension.
had some tension and just okay, you know, we're ready to move into this new season. You know, in those sorts of times. And it felt like a long time. I mean, it felt like a really long time while we were looking. So, you know, I had to be intentional about staying engaged in what I was doing. I certainly didn't do that perfectly. But yeah, there was, and I never felt like at that time, I didn't feel a strong call to vocational ministry. So there were a lot of questions in my head about why am I here at Summit? Because I wasn't your normal seminary guy who, you know, a lot of the guys there were going to go launch churches eventually. And so they had a plan. I was kind of there as this oddball who like had started working there after drifting for years and years. Like I didn't come from seminary. I didn't come in with a like strong, mature faith. Looking back at it now, it was an amazing opportunity to kind of like get all of this really good teaching and, you know, as a staff member, not just a church member. And it also was a time to just prepare, you know, because the job there was not like super demanding. It was a flexible job. And so like we were starting to have kids and I got to work from home a lot. And so it was a good setting to prepare. And I feel like God also gave me that time to kind of engage and re-engage with my faith.
Yeah.
So and there were some things that I learned there that were certainly transferable to, like, I managed volunteers, and, I got to see under the hood of a large organization and how they ran things. And so some of that stuff did end up being helpful,
Yeah.
because you wear so many hats as a small business owner. But yeah, there's a tension in it. None of it happened fast. Nothing happened fast. I mean, we had savings for a year, and it, like, the project ran over so much that we ate all of those up. And, like, I remember the day we opened, we had like $800 left in our bank account. Like, so it was like really coming up to the edge,
Yeah.
of, okay, God, when we open these doors, like, you're going to have to send the people through them, and we're trusting that you will. But the first year or two was a lot of that, like, sort of manna thing of, like, God, will you bring us what we need for today? And that's about as far out as we could look financially, because it was just all so tight.
How long do you think that lasted?
I would say it probably lasted a year, 6 to 12 months. But looking back on it, it was just so clear that it was a time for us to learn how to trust him. Because how often do you get that opportunity where you really you're not getting a salary every month. You need X amount of dollars to come in so you can pay your staff, you can pay the bills. And so it really taught us there are certainly a lot of things that we can do to run a good business and to have good products and have great staff. But there was also just that part of trusting God that he would send enough people through the door. And he did. And for a while, it was like just enough, just enough to make payroll, just enough. But that taught us an important lesson.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's one of those, and I've noticed that in my career path, one of those things that we try to push against. And, like, we don't want to be in those seasons of need and reliance on the Lord every day.
yeah,
We see, you referenced manna. You see, as the Israelites are in the desert, given what they need every single day, like, they're not happy about it. Like,
yeah,
for a very short time, they're happy about it. And then they're just frustrated with the Lord
yeah,
that they haven't moved on. And so God does so much in those seasons, but we also, at least for myself, are eager to be out of it.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah,
So in the church, when you made this transition
yeah.
and started deciding to do the coffee shop, did that stem from that, like, not really feeling like that was your calling? Like, this was a season thing and a blessing to be able to be in it, but you're like, I don't see this being my long term. Or
hmm
was it a financial thing where you're like, I need to provide more for my family and I don't see this on this
hmm
path? Like, how did those decisions to start moving out of that
I,
happen?
I think one important, really important part of my story that is a layer on all of this is, um, throughout, even after I returned to church, I was struggling on and off with a long dependence on alcohol. That came early when I was 14 or 15. I had just tremendous social anxiety, especially as a middle schooler, teen, and high schooler. Pimples all over me, all the works, like all the stuff that, makes you just freak out when you're a teenager. And so alcohol, I quickly discovered, like, would give me, like, the confidence, and so to go into a social situation and not have all that anxiety. And so, I started using it, ironically, to kind of, like, be the sort of person that I thought people would accept, and like, so that became, like, this really integral part of who I was. Because, if I was going to go out and be with people, like, I needed that, because I felt like without it, I was broken from all of the social anxiety and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was still something that I was battling with and not free from when I was at Summit. So, that was a weird wrench because even though I wasn't like a pastor there, I still felt a lot of pressure to not be really honest about that struggle,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm working at a church, people expected me to have it together. Even at a place like Summit, like there was a pressure, that I put on myself,
Yeah.
So that was part of it, but I also I felt like I wasn't really thriving in the assignments that I had there.
Sure.
Like I was really bored. Like I was doing stuff like a lot of like logistical stuff for mobile campus, and it was just, I could see a financial future, but at the time, I just wasn't super interested in staying there in that capacity. Ironically, now that things have dramatically changed in those areas, being an elder and being able to be a pastor at our campus is like one of my greatest joys. And so now I wouldn't say, oh, I'll never go into vocational ministry. Like I would love to be a pastor of a church, but I am already, like I'm able to do that now as also a business owner.
Yeah.
But a lot of that has changed over the last, 5 or 6 years. But yeah, at the time, it just didn't feel like, for a variety of reasons, that was a place for me to stick around. And part of it was I had stuff I had to work through personally, before I kept going. So
when did you end up sort of starting to get a grips on that alcohol dependency and sort of moving past that?
yeah, so the first 2 years at the shop were really tough. I mean, they were tough because of like you said, like having just enough is enough to pay everything, but it's still not enough. Like you're still stressed. You're still like, if something happens, I don't have that in the bank, right? So there was a lot of stress from that. We started with a partner who was also starting her own baking company. And we, at the beginning, decided to sublease a portion of the coffee shop to them. They would do all their custom baking stuff, but they would also bake all the stuff for the shop.
Yeah.
And that actually turned into a huge fiasco. Like, and they added a huge amount of stress on me and my wife, Alex. Like, as soon as the first thing happened there where we had to basically have a disagreement with them about something, things got weird. And like we never could get back to where we were. And so part of the problem was there wasn't really enough room for both of us there.
Sure.
So we pretty quickly were like, we kind of need that space back. But then also the other issue was baking is a very difficult business. It's a lot of labor and it's a lot of material cost if you use good ingredients. And so it is tough to make money baking. And so since we were also had our hand in the pot for her, like 6 months into it, she's like, what I'm making for you guys isn't really worth it. Like I'm not making enough money off that stuff.
Right.
And so the only thing that she was making good money on were like wedding cakes and stuff like that. Imagine like opening your dream thing.
Yeah.
And like you've been, dreaming about this for years. You open it, people are excited, they're enjoying your products, they're enjoying your staff. And then like in the middle of that, you have an unresolvable conflict. It's just like, it was just so awkward because like their space was not like disconnected. It was like, we're walking right by them. And, we did some things that like, I just said some things looking back that I shouldn't have, but we just we couldn't make it. We couldn't heal it at the time. Like we're good with them now, but that really added another huge strain on the business. And so all that to say, that's a long-winded explanation of that pushed me back into drinking during those first 2 years. Like I had no idea. I had no coffee experience. I didn't really have any management experience. So everything was new. And I just like, tapped out, with drinking.
Yeah.
That, it just quickly got to a head. And one night we had a friend over from church, and he's a cop. And we joke about this now because it's like, of all the people, like, he's trained to detect, right? Like he's trained to detect alcohol on people. And that night, for whatever reason, like I just didn't do my usual dance of like just enough so people can't really notice, I just went all out. And so it was a disaster, like I was drunk at this dinner. And so I was really getting to like the lowest point at that. And then he called the next day and was like, dude, I love you, but like, bro, like what's going on, And so in his small group was the guy who runs Summit's recovery ministry. It's called G4. And so he connected me with him like the same day I went and met with him. And that began my healing journey out of it. I ended up meeting with him every week for a year, and praise God. But just like after that experience, I was able to set it down and walk away. And so that was almost 6 years ago now.
Yeah.
And, but that dramatically changed my life, because that, people that have struggled with addiction, we all struggle, Bible doesn't use the word addiction, but it uses the word idolatry a lot.
Right.
And those are pretty much interchangeable.
Yeah.
So we all understand addiction to a certain degree. Yeah. I really felt like Christian in Pilgrim's Progress, where like, he comes up to the cross and he has this giant burden on his back that's representative of like his sin and all struggles, and it just falls off into the tomb. And that, that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
And I felt like I could finally like be with God and not have that big thing in between us, So that changed everything about my faith. And I was able to kind of like start experiencing God in much more profound ways and walk with him, that just changed everything.
Yeah.
That was kind of just a big wall that needed to get smashed down. And interestingly, like, I don't go sit in front of grocery stores, like with white knuckles, like fighting the urge to go get a beer. Like, I think that something to encourage people is like, Jesus is in like the healing business, like radical healing business. And so he healed me from that. And I have no desire I don't like alcohol anymore. Like, it's not like that. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to have to like try my best for the rest of my life to not like cave in and go get a 6-pack. It's like, he just took that away, and it's gone. Yeah. And so you could be sitting here drinking a beer and I literally just would have no interest in it.
Yeah.
And that's unexplainable.
Yeah.
In my opinion, to that degree. So, that was a big change, and that changed my ability to run my business.
Yeah.
Changed my relationship with my wife, kids, community, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are watching this, not just listening, this is a Topo Chico water. This is not a Heineken on the table. Just for those who are curious.
Yeah, let's get the label.
So what I think would be great to kind of dive into a little bit is you mentioned like those 2 years that were really stressful. Like for anyone who's considering an entrepreneurial journey, like I'm sure there's stresses in any job you're doing, whether you have a salary or not. Like that job isn't guaranteed, your salary is not guaranteed. There are stresses there, but I think it's easier to like not be worried about making ends meet and like just, I know my bills are going to be paid unless you're not making enough, which causes turmoil. But in the entrepreneurial journey, there are always going to be some season of stress, specifically around finances,
Mhm.
or it could be partner related and stuff like that. Um, Looking back on that season where you weren't able to fully just rely on the Lord in it, you were kind of self dependent, putting an idol.
Mhm.
How do you think you could have approached that differently, knowing what you know now, being sober? Um, how do you think you would have worked through some of those challenges? Because they still would have felt
Right.
likely just as hard.
Yeah.
Um, so, any advice you would give someone navigating that in their career journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I ended up doing is just a lot of like not being there. Like the first couple of years, our management staff there came to us and they were like, "Hey, we do not feel supported by you guys." And part of that was like we had babies. Like
Yeah.
my wife was having babies. We were just we knew from I think one thing that's helpful, maybe this will help answer that question, is to the best of your ability trying to decide like, do I want to be do I want to like be a business owner, or do I want to be like a manager? Like
Right.
what if things go well, like what is my role
Yeah.
gonna be? Do I love roasting coffee? And so like I need, if I do and I want to stick with that, I'm going to have to make arrangements so that the company is run well and I can still roast and not like get torn away all the time to do all these other things that anybody running a business has to do. Deciding those sorts of things for yourself so that you have a plan kind of going
Right.
into it. Um, and then, like the first year of any business, you have just got to be there. You 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 know, you don't know what you're doing. Your staff don't know what they're doing. So I think one of our big failures is that we weren't there the way that we should have been.
Yeah.
And there were some reasons for that. Like it wasn't just us saying we don't want to be there.
Yeah.
There were some reasons for that, but it doesn't change what it was. We weren't there. We also didn't, part of it was just, like in our business, it's like, do you hire someone with experience, but that's going to come with their ways of doing things, or do you hire people and train them in your way of doing things? And we have found generally that it works out better for us to train people the way that we want them to be trained, like into the way that we think about what we're doing at Cultivate. We generally do it that way, but in the beginning, you may really need to bring somebody on that's been a barista for 10 years and can come and help you. Like we weren't there, and we also didn't like really use the experience that we had
Yeah.
and like hey guys, how do we do this? How do we build this?
Yeah.
Like, how do we put these systems in place so that this thing works? Having your personal life and worked out to the point where you can be there and not be making things worse with all your stress and anxiety, I think is super important. And like, in my opinion, like, that's only really going to come if you have a foundation that explains the deeper questions about why you're doing any of it,
Yeah.
because eventually those are going to come around. So, if I don't really believe anything and I just, eventually I'm going to be like, what's the point? Like, what am I, I need those foundational truths, to kind of steer and guide what I'm doing with my business. And it's that kind of stuff. It's like, can you be healthy when you're getting rolling and things are tough and you could be really stressed out. And then just like, we should have been there and we weren't there,
Yeah.
and that was one of the main problems,
Yeah.
that we ran into. So,
Yeah. I'm sure.
does that answer the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that gives some insight there. So when it comes to Cultivate, and like we've focused a bit on like the challenges, the early days,
hmm
um, how is God using this opportunity to have a coffee shop in a community?
Yeah, it's incredible and astounding. Like we had no idea all the different things that would happen. And so much of it is like out of our control. It's not an initiative that we've started. It's not, it's just because the space is there, God is using it for his purposes. And that has come a lot of different ways. I mean, one thing is that different community groups, including churches, rent it and use it for the different things that they're trying to do. So, if people don't have their own building, we've got multiple church groups that meet regularly. And so they do like their youth ministry at Cultivate in the evening when we're shut down. So we've been able to be a space for those sorts of purposes. But the day to day is just like, people coming and meeting with people, sharing their life with people. We have a ton of people doing Bible studies there. Anytime I go through there, there's somebody with a Bible open, either on their own or with a group of people. Even just last week, there was a guy an older guy I'd never seen, who said, "Hey, I just want to let you guys know, I work with Young Life. I live in Charlotte. I'm here for something this weekend, and I somehow am meeting this person here, and then I'll be gone. I'll never be back." But during that meeting, the guy next to him just listened to what they were talking about, and then after the meeting, approached him and said, "Those truths that you were talking about that you believe about God, and would you go over those with me?" And he led that guy to faith in that moment. And this is like a guy that may never, very well never even come back.
Right.
So I think that's a good story to illustrate just like how, I mean, what are the chances of something like how God is working in the most unexpected ways.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that happens very regularly. And even people that I think because of I think because of all of the believers, like our local campus here, like all the staff and a lot of people are there all the time. Like they do all their meetings there. But even people that are not Christians have told me that when they come in, they just have this sense and feeling that this is a good and safe place. And so I think that it's just God's presence there, literally they're feeling something that they don't even know what exactly it is, but even for them, that's impacting them. And so that's been a big thing, is just look at all the things God can do with something like that. One location, it's just one little coffee shop, but it's just a constant flow of stories of how it's helping people thrive in the community.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild.
One thing that I've loved when I've gone in there is just to see how many people are always in there.
Yeah.
It's always packed.
Yes.
Which is so cool. I even mentioned to you, even though I don't drink coffee, I've multiple times dreamed about opening a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Just because I love the community that it is. When I moved to Portland to start a church, I spent a lot of time in coffee shops, just sitting there, meeting people, working on stuff. In college, I spent a lot of time in coffee shops studying, just having Bible studies with people. And so I think it's such a great place to actually have ministry.
Yeah. Well, and we live in an age of people being isolated. They're in their little box in their home in the suburb, and it's people, and we saw this during COVID, right? It's people are so hungry, to be in community. And I think that part of that is, a culture of just doing everything on your phone and not really having to interact with people, like you used to. But it's a golden age for coffee shops in a sense, because people are just, I mean, desperate, you know, and even just to be around people like you described, like even just being in a coffee shop and looking around and seeing people learning and growing and laughing. And I mean, it's just such an energizing
Yeah.
thing for anybody, introvert, extrovert, you know, I mean, we're all human and we're all, you know, given that sense from God, that desire to not be alone, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I won't have you go into any details on this, but like those first few years financially were really tight.
Hmm.
You know, you got down to your last $800.
Yeah.
Things are day by day. Financially, how is the business doing at this point? Like, are you taking above what you need at this point?
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Last year we hit the revenue that was like, at the beginning, it was like, okay, this is best case scenario. And that's what we hit last year and went significantly above it. One of the things that is really helpful that I recommend
Yeah.
in any business is you can find on Facebook a group of owners in your field. Like they have it for everybody. So you can just, even before you start, join a group. Like we joined several coffee owner Facebook groups.
Yeah.
Join a group and just spend 3 hours reading what everyone has written over the last month, because that will give you a pretty daggone accurate sense of what to expect financially in that industry. You know, and you see what people are hoping for and then what it actually is usually. And that can really help you understand your goals financially and understand also what's realistic. I think a lot of people do some quick, shoddy math and think I can open a coffee shop and, you know, make, $500,000 a year. You know, all I got to do is sell. But
Yeah.
when you get in there and you read and you start to understand all the expenses, all the overhead, it's labor intensive. Cost of goods have skyrocketed. That's an issue in our industry right now.
Right.
Coffee is at an all-time high, buying it raw. But that can really give you some good goalposts,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, we are, according to all of the research we've done in our field, like understanding what does the Starbucks make in a day, like what some of these different benchmarks. We passed into, I would say pretty confidently, like for single location coffee shops like ours, we're like in the top 5% of performance. We have some opinions about things that we've done to help that happen, but really it's just, it's just God's timing and, the place he gave us and the time we got in there right before Fuquay boomed. There's so many people there now. It's just like constantly full of people. That has opened up a whole new door. And this is like where it really gets fun, is when you are bringing in more than you need, then you can start giving it away. And that is like so much fun. And like, we can be generous with our employees. Like we can be generous with our community because we have what we need to operate and pay our employees well. We have a reasonable living salary for our family to pay our bills. And then we have more on top of that. We decided early on to, in a mechanism to protect ourselves from greed, that we would cap our own salary. And so anything that comes in above that, we just are able to give away. Yeah. And that's been a lot of fun because the first couple of years, that bracket was zero. It was zero or very little. It's so much more fun than like, oh, this is just extra money that I can put in my account to spend on myself. It's a lot more fulfilling and rewarding. And I would say like around year 5, like things started to become like that. Okay. Where we could start being generous and the shop is really doing well.
Yeah. So with that, how you're wired, and I think you and I are wired similarly in being dreamers,
Mm-hmm.
like it's easy to have a million ideas come to your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially when, like, so I'll reframe this. So for myself, a lot of my business ideas, some of them are just because I like to have fun and I'm curious and I want to
Mm-hmm.
try things. And some of them have been like, I haven't been able to achieve financially, especially when we were living in California,
Mm-hmm.
what I really need to achieve what we feel like we're called to here.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my ideas are how can I make more money better?
Which is a whole different
Um,
thing.
but now you're in a position where because the coffee shop is so successful, like I guarantee you've had many conversations, if not your own thoughts, of opening more locations. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
people are telling you to open more
Constantly.
locations.
Yes.
Um,
Weekly.
but I know you have all these other different ideas, including starting your own podcast, which is less monetary focused. But
Mm-hmm.
um, how do you balance being a dreamer
Mm-hmm.
and not spreading yourself too thin? Because I know you spread yourself in a lot of ministry too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you manage keeping yourself to a reasonable position and not overextending yourself?
Ask me again in 10 years, maybe I'll have a better answer for you. The ideas, if they say ideas, they're harmless, right? Like I can have a million ideas. Well, maybe, I don't know if I should say harmless. They may be harmful if I'm constantly distracted from doing my work well and being content with like, oh, I'm just like in my 20s, I spent my whole 20s just looking forward all the time. And that's not the way that God calls us to live. And so um, it is very challenging for me to not constantly be scheming up some new ideas. I think part of it is just, I think one of the really interesting things about Christianity is like part of our freedom comes in understanding our limitations.
For sure.
And so part of it has been over the last few years, especially as I've approached 40 and my body's slowing down, starting to understand my own limitations and understand that if I push myself past those, there'll be consequences. I had a couple of health things over the last that I think really woke me up to that over the last 5 years, like nothing serious, but I basically just like had a breakdown. I guess shortly after the time I quit drinking, I just had like a mental breakdown, like from my body had a breakdown of like holding in all of this stress and strain and all this stuff. And it just like came one night and I thought I was having a heart attack, but I think like best they can tell, like I just had a massive panic attack, which I never had before. Started me on a journey of realizing I can't just go full speed, guns blazing forever. Can do that when you're young, but you actually start to get literally physically limited. And so I do think it is really important to be mindful and have the goal of being content, as a dreamer, and striking the balance is tough. But I think like one of the things I've had to do this year is actually chop some stuff out because last year I just pushed a little too far over. And so, what that might look like for the Tuesday morning Bible study I'm involved with. I asked the guys if I could just host and not lead this semester to just chop a little bit back, so that's one less thing that I need to be doing, because Cultivate operates without me. We have general manager, we have a whole system in place there so that I don't have to be there working on the bar. I do have some ability to explore other things that I wouldn't have if I had a 9 to 5. So I don't want to toss that away either.
Yeah.
But I would say like, I don't have a formula, but I just, as a dreamer, I'm probably going to bite off more than I can chew. So like, I have to assume that and kind of make decisions based on that,
Yeah.
like be conservative. Like, say no to that. Don't push yourself too far and spread yourself too thin. And then like in terms of, well, man, if you're doing so well here, why don't you go do the same thing in Cary? So some of that is like understanding our limitations again,
Yeah.
and wanting, just make some of those are decisions so that we can be with our kids when they're young. So
Yeah.
like every extra location is a good bit more complexity, and we just feel like right now that would push us, like spread us too thin. I think it's getting counsel from other people. Like, do you observe me as a person who's running around like stretched too thin? Like you probably have people in your life that can answer that question. Like my wife will tell me those sorts of, hey, I can tell you're, I don't think you should do that. Like you should probably say no to that. And so being humble and getting feedback from people around you, because you really don't, man. There's such a beautiful life to live, where you like as Christians, we shouldn't be living anxiety riddled, stressed out lives. Like we can live in freedom and peace, and those things are things Jesus desires us to live into. But for a dreamers, like it's a lot of maybe my default right now should be no, unless something really sticks out,
Yeah.
because my life is full.
Yeah.
So, but it's really hard. Like after I quit drinking, this was especially difficult to just start living in the moment and be
Right.
content. So before I was like, when's my next drink? When's my next this? And getting out of that way of living and just being like, all right, then you can actually be present to start hearing and understanding what God is actually trying to show you. Like, what is God going to do today? Where is he going to lead me? If I'm looking ahead, I'll just totally miss that.
Yeah.
So that's another huge advantage. Like when you start living in the moment, and I'm not perfect at that at all, but then all of a sudden I can see the people around me. I can see what God's trying to do. Like, and what he's trying to do is way bigger than like the box that I try to put him in. So I've got to have margin and room. That's another thing too, of like leading. I know that I'm a high capacity person, but leaving room, so that if God points me in this direction, like I can do that and I'm not a slave to my schedule.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's a balance, but that's definitely something that I've been trying to work on.
It's a hard dance.
Because I've lived a lot of my life just looking ahead full throttle, for sure.
It's an easy
It's an
temptation.
exhausting way to live. Yeah. Like I don't think I probably would have had a heart attack or something if I did another decade of that. And a lot of people do,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I'd love to touch a little bit on the Cultivate Cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I know when you've always had a heart for how do we give back
Mm-hmm.
to the community. And you started with like, hey, I came from a background of alcohol addiction. Like I'm going to offer free coffee to ministries or AA kind of things, correct?
Yeah.
And then you realize like there's not as much need there as
Yeah.
I thought there was.
Yeah.
But you knew like that would have been meaningful to you. Like that's something that we can do. And then that shifted into you created the Cultivate Cooperative, which is still in its infancy stage.
Yep.
Of taking this food pantry model and trying to make it more personal, where you can invest in people's lives. So providing good, healthy food to people in need and deliver it to them. So how did this idea come up? Where are you in that process, and what is the dream vision for this?
Wanting to give back in some kind of meaningful way. We started dabbling with, we thought, well, there's always at AA meetings, you typically got stale donuts and crappy coffee in the back, so what if the coffee was good? What we found was even in the organization of AA, they're just not set up to like do stuff like that. So I couldn't send a pallet of coffee to AA headquarters and them get it out. It's just not set up to operate that way. So there wasn't really any sort of distribution model that we could use. And so that ended up just being very organic, like some local chapters here would pick it up, stuff like that. The co-op idea came from really just like scripture confronting me with the reality that Christians are like what definitely called to serve the poor. Like, and I think, to the degree of like directness of that is probably debatable, but it's not like a optional ministry for the people that seem interested. Like, hey, does anybody want to join our Help the Poor ministry? Like, realizing the scripture paints it as a core component of being a Christian, is to help people in need in your community. I mean, it was just that. It was like, okay, I need to do that somehow, like for myself. And then the idea grew into, and then I talked to the food bank of North Carolina and said, what do you guys need? And that's another thing, like getting into stuff like go find the big dogs and just ask. But instead of trying to invent it yourself, like, hey, what, you guys are the professionals. Like, what do you need? And they basically said, well, we really need like mobile. We need to like organizations that can bring food to people. Now that is the most inefficient, costly way. Mm-hmm. That's way more complicated than just having a warehouse and having a bunch of people come there. But the advantage to it is like when you're looking at it as a ministry where you want to get to know that person, then it's great because you go to their home and you have most of them, people want to talk a little bit and you get to build a relationship with them. And it's not just assembly line. I'm not dissing those. Yeah. Like that's important. That's helpful. And you got to have that for like mass to get that stuff out. But what we're doing is anybody in the community can apply for help. And a lot of it is temporary. It's like somebody gets a work injury or loses their job, or, there's a lot of people living on the edge of just able to pay their bills, very little savings. And so you can apply and we will bring groceries for a week, like in some capacity. We try to do it every other week right now, but our goal eventually is to partner with the food bank, get food for like pennies on the dollar from them, and then allow people in the community from the church community, from our community at Cultivate, to like get assigned a family. And so they would get assigned a family, come to a central warehouse to pick up the food for the week, and then they would go deliver, but they would stick with that family and build a relationship with them. So that's the next phase. Right now, we're just doing, we're just bringing it to a dozen families that have applied. Mm-hmm. But we had to shut all of that off really quickly because it was like very quickly overwhelmed, the system. So there's a lot of need. Yeah. And it's in a upper middle class suburban place like Fuquay. You don't see it necessarily driving around, but there's people in need in every community, And so so that's what we're trying to do. And we're in phase 1, but we're hoping to move into phase 2 this year and get people more involved that want to be, get people connected to families, and get to a distribution system where we can scale up.
Yeah, it's such a cool vision and opportunity to serve.
Yeah.
And I think something that you mentioned makes me just kind of think back to Jesus' ministry, which is most of his ministry was not convenient and it was far from efficient.
Right.
But I think especially as business people, mm-hmm. it's easy to want to pursue, even in all areas of our life, efficiency. Mm-hmm. And like making sure that everything is timed out, it fits in our schedule and all that. And most of Jesus' ministry, obviously he didn't necessarily have what we would consider a normal schedule.
Right.
But it was like people stopping him in the midst of a large crowd. There were lots of different things that weren't ideal situations.
Right.
And so part of that comes to what you said earlier of actually living for today instead of the future.
Yeah.
And being open to that. But
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's a good reminder for those of us trying to find ministry and opportunities to serve within our vocation, is recognizing that it may not be a convenient or efficient way to
Right.
approach it.
Yeah.
But another thing I love that you're doing is you're inviting others into
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a lot easier for you to just go to the food bank and serve once a month.
Yeah.
Or go to a homeless shelter, or do
Right.
something like that.
Right. Clock in, clock out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let me let that one's real loud.
Yeah.
There's the warehouse for you, folks.
Yeah.
It's much easier to just clock in, clock out. But I think that's another way, like if you're wired to where you like to build things,
Mm-hmm.
and you can figure out solutions to problems, it gives you the opportunity to invite others into ministry.
Yeah.
Because I don't think everyone's wired to build something from scratch.
Mm-mm.
But you
No.
also went to food banks so that you didn't have to fully build it from scratch.
Right.
Like they helped inform you.
Yeah.
So I think all of those are some really good insights on how to approach
Yeah.
that.
Well, and like we were talking about before we hit record, it's like so many things you can jump in and get your feet wet without having to say, we just like took I made a Google application, put it in a place where we have a platform, right? As a small business, but in a place where people could see it. And then our family just went and got groceries and took it to that family.
Yeah.
And that's before we filed a nonprofit. It's before we started receiving donations. It's before we had a space to store the food. Because part of it in my mind, I was like, this may just be a thing for our family,
Yeah.
because that's what it started at. It was a personal conviction that our family needs to give back. And I think that it would do us well to do it directly, because writing a check just can become such a,
Yeah.
like my kids don't, well, they don't care. I mean, they don't get that at all, but they do get going, it is not efficient. We could just give them a grocery card, like a gift card.
Yeah.
It's not efficient to go get groceries for somebody, but it tells them that they took their time to go get these groceries and they were thoughtful about it. They gave me recipes, they gave me coffee from their coffee, those things, people see that and that adds value,
Yeah.
because they're like, oh, they didn't just throw me a handout by just doing it the easiest way possible.
Yeah. I think the practical being there and adding the relational side to it shows people so much more that they're loved.
Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, when it comes to serving and finding opportunities to serve, rarely does it go smoothly or perfectly either. There's
Right.
always something that comes up. I'll give a silly example from this last week. Someone that we know, the wife had a surgery for a pregnancy that they're having. They had to have a little operation to make sure their twins were healthy and safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were going to do a meal for them. And what we've been doing for a lot of people, just with craziness of life, is just buying a DoorDash gift card
Yeah.
and send it over, which is great and
Right.
helpful. But I was like, you know what? They're 8 minutes away from us. We're going to make them a meal.
Yeah.
And so Kristen, my wife, was working hard making this beef bolognese that someone had made for us when Kristen had a surgery at one point, and loved this recipe. She's making it, getting it all ready. My daughter Addison is like, I'm going to help. And so she's helping. And two of my other kids just aren't feeling great. They're on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes before it's ready, one of my kids starts throwing up. We didn't know it was a stomach bug. We're like, oh, you're kidding me. And so that puts this like odd, like, man, is it wise to bring this food now? Like,
make them all sick. Miserable.
And we had these to-go containers, these like aluminum, so that you don't have to like get the dish from the people. All that.
Right.
And my other daughter's like, I want to help move that. And my wife's like, they're kind of hard. Like, no, I want to do it. And then she's like, fine. And the thing just collapses, and the entire bolognese just goes straight to the floor.
Total fail.
And I end up like texting a picture of this pile of pasta on the floor. Just say, hey, food catastrophe. Let me know where you want food from.
Yeah.
I'm going to order it from you.
Right.
And I end up door dashing him food.
Yeah.
So sometimes that service doesn't necessarily like fall through in the way that you want it to. But God put us in a position where we could afford the food that got destroyed on the floor. B, we were in a position where we could afford, and we had money set aside that we could afford to pay to DoorDash some food over to them. And it gave us like one, I told my daughter Addison, who's just destroyed by the fact that she dropped it. Right. And I told her, I was like, for all we know, God literally made that thing fall because that would have made them get the stomach flu. Right. If we had delivered it. Like, we don't know the purpose in this. It could have just been, who knows? Right. But these all allow us to like bring our children into the ministry too. Yeah. And kind of show them like ministry is not clean. It's not perfect. But it forms and changes our heart when we step into these different things. Right. How would you say, you have kids varying ages, similar to me. Do you feel like they are able to step into this ministry at all yet with joy and excitement, or is it more still like mom and dad's?
Yeah, they are. I mean, it is a kid-friendly sort of thing to go get groceries, and I think it's been helpful for them because otherwise they're not having any sort of exposure towards anyone that literally just doesn't have the money in their bank to go get food to eat, And so they have participated. They don't always do it with a great attitude, and we don't take them all the time. Yeah. It's kind of just like you said, it's messy. It's like sometimes we do, and they hate it. Sometimes we do, and then we feel like at the end they say something that's like, oh, it's clicking, like they're getting something, like, and that kind of gets into like, what is our family mission? Like, that can give it some teeth. Like, one of the things our family does is, if someone in our community, even if we don't know them even, doesn't have food, we take it to them, And right now, that's one of the things our family does. And maybe they'll take that, and that'll be a thing their family does. Right. But it's like that kind of stuff enables us to like, I think there's some power in declaring and identifying, like, what is our family doing? Like, are we just existing, like jumping from activity to activity, or are we here to serve people? Yeah. And it's one way to imprint that. Yeah. So we try to involve them as much as we can. Like last night, I took the boys to a prayer walk around the high school where our church meets. Yeah. And, they're running around acting crazy half the time, but they also prayed, and they also heard a bunch of people praying, and they probably heard a lot of things that they just haven't even thought about, like prayers for, a special ed class. Like my son was like, asking more about that. And, so it sometimes, like, I don't always take them to those sorts of things,
For sure.
sometimes I do. And, but we try to do as much as of that kind of thing as we can together. And it is messy, and like it doesn't, it's not clean,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's life and that's relationships. So the co-op has been a really good kind of family friendly sort of way
Yeah.
to serve,
Mhm.
so
That's great. Yeah.
yeah,
We personally just started working on creating our own like family mission statement.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and for us, um, being adoptive parents, like
mm-hmm,
God has laid it on our hearts about caring for orphans and widows.
mm-hmm,
Like, and so that's part of our mission statement.
mm-hmm,
As a family, we go out to help children in need, but we also, one of our family goals is to help equip and lead others in that as well.
mm-hmm,
We haven't done a great job of like I want to get it printed in like a unique way. Maybe I do it over a photo or something
mm-hmm,
and we can change it over time, but to just remind our kids um, of what we are about as a family.
yeah,
But something I think I need to do better of is like being willing to have them fail,
yeah,
like taking the kids on the prayer walk. Like right now, especially with my 3.5-year-old, like that just sounds miserable.
yeah,
Like just chasing and stuff, but like
right,
recognizing that even the small bits that they do
mm-hmm,
experience and over here is a step in a healthy direction. Also a step of showing them why we do things that are selfless,
right,
um, rather than just entertaining ourselves.
yeah. Well, and like you said with the dinner example, I mean, what they really need, probably more than successful experiences, is failure, and then seeing you like be grateful and thankful, and like going through that failure and still seeing God's purpose in it, and like, you know like that's something that is super important for all
Yeah.
of us, is to be able to praise God, when things don't go the right way. And so that
Yeah.
was a great opportunity, you know, for that total fail, like
Yeah.
trying to do a good thing and it was a total fail. It's a great opportunity to teach that lesson, and to learn it ourselves. Like
Yeah.
you're probably a little bit irritated, you know, because like that's a tough meal to make, and it's like there it is all over the floor, staining it or whatever,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Those, I don't always have a perfect response in the moment.
yeah,
But we quickly were able to pivot. And right now, my son is in a phase of dropping cups of whatever he's drinking
yeah,
at least every other day. So I'm in the mode of like, just
Yeah.
like dropping my head. Okay.
Okay.
And getting over it. So it probably started with a,
right, right, yeah,
but I think it's okay to be frustrated and pivot from that.
yeah,
All right, couple last quick questions. These are ones I try to do each time.
mm-hmm.
Um, the first of the two is, what is a situation that you've had to handle running your business um, that only makes sense as a follower of Jesus? What I mean by that is like, making a financial decision that, you could cut a corner, but that that's not the right way to do it. And the world around you'd be like, it's fine to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, dealing with people in a certain way, being extra gracious in
Yeah.
a situation. Like, what's a situation where you had to approach things because you knew God wanted you to do that, even though it wouldn't make sense to even some Christians around you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that to some degree, having a posture of just like humility and generosity towards your customers and your staff doesn't make sense. There are times where, I mean, even the world would say something like, well, that'd be nice if that person gets really sick that you could give them a week's worth of wages anyway, or stuff like that. But there is a degree, I think what doesn't make sense, probably, to your question, is there are a lot of places where we could buy cheaper ingredients, buy cheaper products, cut corners, where we intentionally spend a lot more money to make the product better. And yes, that comes back in our favor because people will like it more, but it's very tempting. Like, it's a lot harder and more expensive to make our own syrups than to just buy pre-made ones, right? So stuff like that, we have money on the table that we could take if our mentality was just like, let's just squeeze every dollar out of our customers. And that is that's the way the world does it, but it's not the way that Jesus does it, Yeah. And the other thing too is probably like when everyone around you is like, why don't you expand? Why don't you get more? Like that is even, many Christians have said something like that to us, like, go get more, go get more. And I get the argument of the more you have, the more you can give away. That's a risky thing though, because the more you have also, the more you can be infected by greed. So I think it is countercultural, but very Jesus-like to just say, this is enough. This is enough. And now I get the tension because it's like, maybe he, like, it's good to grow your business. It's good to expand, but if the reason is more in my bank account, then it's not good, And so that is a radical difference, but it's a freeing difference because, if we were being worldly in this, then we would probably open more locations, stretch ourselves thin, rake in as many dollars as we can so that we can have, the nicest cars and a vacation house and all this stuff, but, Jesus is enough for us. So we don't need that stuff. And we can say that and mean it, So I think that that's like radically different and not necessarily obvious on the surface, but, that's part of the reason that we're happy doing what we're doing. It's like, we could go open another Cultivate and probably make another $100,000 a year off of it. We feel like that was just too thin and compromise our family and compromise a bunch of things. So yeah, that's a big difference. And, you just see that in most businesses. Like, it's really just like a ruthless, let me get everything out of you that I can in exchange for like the minimal product. Like, what product can I get by selling? The cheapest product for the most back, and that's a greed-based, economic model that unfortunately is the way of the world. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
If you've listened this far into the episode and you're hearing the forklift going back and forth, all I can say is things are messy, like we've discussed earlier.
Yeah, it brings home the point, one of our main thrusts.
We want things to be perfect, and it's not always perfect.
Yeah.
So the last question I have for you is thinking back to 18-year-old Benny, whatever you went by when you were younger, and you're starting your career. What advice would you give to yourself, or what advice would you give to a young man starting his vocational career?
I would probably say Christ is enough. That your status as a son or daughter of God is the identity that will give you the most free, most joyous, most fulfilling life, no matter what your career is, And so, like, I wish that I had really grabbed that back then, because I spent a lot of years looking to other things to fill that gap, you know. And Jesus says, you know, if you're thirsty, there's a lot of places that you can go get a drink. It might taste good in the moment, but the only place, you know, where that will fulfill you indefinitely, you know, is coming to me. You know, I am the living water. And that really is true. And that's experiential. You know, it's not just an abstract. It's not just a head thing. It's a heart thing. Like, it's a relationship with Jesus, you know, where you experience his love and his delight. And the other thing I would say is, you know, he's got a part in the story of God for you. And so, like, don't stress it. Like, if you can learn how to hear his voice and follow him, he's got a plan for your life and he'll lead you. You know, there's a passage that says explicitly, like, hey, God has prepared the good works for your life. You know, if he's God, then he knows the story. Like, he's writing the story. And so I want to play my part, you know, like, and that's the best place that I could be, you know, like in the flow of his will in my life. So yeah, kind of two things, like, just that identity thing is so important. And then let him lead you, you know, and no matter what your career is, wherever he does lead you, like, it'll be rich and it'll be, you know, it'll be the best thing for you, because that's who he is. You know, he's a good father. So he wants the best things for us.
I love that response. And I feel like sometimes it sounds easier said than done,
Yeah.
like, to truly abide and trust in. But like you mentioned, he is a good father. He does care for us. And yeah, business can be a lot better when you're not finding your joy in how much money you end up making, or how much notoriety you get for it, how much people value you because of what you do.
Yeah.
And it's hard to sometimes have that mentality.
Yeah.
But it's so important. So thanks so much for coming on today, having this conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
And my hope is that this is helpful for any of you who are listening as you navigate your career. I'll probably do an update on my career soon and some stuff that I'm doing in a future episode to just show, like, you know, as a 40-year-old now, like, I'm still navigating and working through career and vocation and trying to be faithful with where God has me, but also being willing to pivot into new things in new seasons. So thanks as always for listening, for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.